Good afternoon, and thank you for joining me. And I also want to thank Senator Kristin Phillips-Hill from your county for standing with me and discussing this important issue. And I'm glad we're starting to turn a corner on COVID-19. As you can see, I'm not wearing a mask. I've been fully vaccinated for the past month, and I would urge anybody who has not been fully vaccinated to do so. But even though we're starting to turn a corner, there's still a lot of work to be done, particularly here in Pennsylvania, and with regards to our economy, and to help stabilize our economy, and to help states and communities get back on their feet. The federal government is distributing $1.9 trillion nationwide under the American Rescue Plan Act, or ARPA. For Pennsylvania, that includes $7.3 billion direct aid to the state and another $6.2 billion to local governments. And whenever there's a massive outflow of cash from government, there's two things that happen. The first, there are entities who are not entitled to these funds. They think of deceptive ways to get these funds. The second is that some of the funds will be misspent by others who receive these funds for one specific purpose, and of course they use it for another purpose. And we already saw this happen with the Federal Paycheck Protection Program, which was designated to help save jobs by providing loans that could be forgiven. And during that time period, there weren't enough safeguards in place prior to the loans being awarded. And as a result, the federal government estimated that hundreds of millions of dollars were in fact lost due to fraud. And here in Pennsylvania, that is something that I am trying to prevent as your Auditor General. And I want to be clear, by receiving these funds does not mean that Pennsylvania won the lottery. These are taxpayer dollars. And once this money is out the door and is spent, it's gone. Because I don't know if anybody else knows that we are ever going to see another stimulus like this. That's why it's so important to be careful and have the safeguards in place to protect these dollars. And if misused, it's going to be nearly impossible to get back. And even if we catch somebody who received funds, spent these funds that they were not legally entitled, if we have a successful prosecution, restitution is ordered, we are probably going to get back pennies on a dollar. And from my work as a former law enforcement officer, I've in fact seen that. So today, I'm asking the General Assembly to enact safeguards at the state level to make sure every taxpayer dollar goes to where it is intended to be used. And Pennsylvanians are relying on us to make sure their money is spent to help their communities recover from the economic disaster that we have unfortunately faced as a result of COVID-19. And we can't afford to lose even a single nickel to fraud, waste, and abuse. the federal ARPA legislation would provide funding to support inspector generals and other fraud fighters working at the federal level so they can safeguard and have some oversight of the ARPA process. So the federal government has realized that when the initial rollouts from CARES and a protection plan went out, they didn't necessarily have the safeguards in place. But under the ARPA funds, the Inspector General's office and the federal government are working together to assure that these safeguards are in place. And Pennsylvania needs to do the same. And we need transparency, oversight, and accountability for this massive amount of funding. And we need it here at the state level. One of the things that my office has done, we've been in contact with other state auditors. We've been in contact with the state auditor from West Virginia. We've been in contact with the state auditor from Delaware. And I believe the state auditor from West Virginia, after they spoke to us, has also been in contact with the state auditor from Ohio. So there's a growing coalition of state auditors who we all share the same concern. And that concern is watch the funds up front, have the processes and the safeguards in place prior to those funds going out the door. And this is a bipartisan issue because everybody deserves to know where Pennsylvania's and nationwide. We need to know how our tax dollars are in fact being spent. Thank you. And now I'd like to introduce Senator Kristin Phillips-Hill.
Good afternoon, and thank you, General DeFoor, for your leadership on this critical issue. I'm State Senator Kristin Phillips-Hill, and I have the great honor of representing the citizens of the 28th District in York County. And this last year, we have seen an incredible amount of federal tax dollars flow into our state. The General shared those numbers, and they're to be distributed to entities that have been most impacted by this pandemic. Federal, state, or local tax dollars may matter to us as we look at balance sheets, but to the hardworking Pennsylvania taxpayer, it is your money. Unfortunately, we have witnessed an incredible number of individuals working to defraud our system over the last year. And whether it be to defraud our unemployment compensation system by filing false claims or fictitiously applying for a loan to assist a business, there's fraud to be found. And I have heard stories over the last year of businesses applying for a loan, turning around and selling the business within days and holding on to those funds provided by the taxpayers. Fraud is fraud, and we need proper oversight, transparency, accountability for all of those funds. We know that the American Rescue Plan of 2021 will be the single largest influx of federal funding into this Commonwealth. And just because these are one-time funds, it doesn't mean that they should be abused or misused. In fact, quite the opposite. And that is why Republicans and Democrats are joining the state's top fiscal watchdog to call for proper oversight of this massive infusion of cash. Because at the end of the day, whether this funding comes from the federal government or the state government, it is all coming out of the taxpayer's wallet. It doesn't matter which side of the aisle that you sit on. You want to see this money go to individuals and entities that have been most impacted by this pandemic. And most importantly, regardless of political affiliation, the people who make a career of trying to cheat the system should be held accountable and face the fullest extent of the law. I'm hopeful that this is the start of ensuring proper oversight of these funds. It's one thing to point out flaws. but bad actors must be held accountable and safeguards must be in place to deter future fraud. My Senate Bill 250 will allow the state to claw back any state grant dollars if those funds were used in bad faith. It's time that the taxpayers are in the driver's seat rather than reading stories of waste, fraud, and abuse in their government. So together, Republicans and Democrats, we recognize that we need greater oversight, transparency, accountability, and common sense when it comes to these funds, and I applaud our state's top fiscal watchdog, Auditor General DeFoor, for his efforts in this endeavor. His leadership is putting us on the right path to safeguard these hard-earned taxpayer dollars. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. And I'll now open it up to any questions. Okay, how are you? Well, one of the things that happens is, as far as the processes for determining who gets the funds, how they apply for the funds, and how they end up being distributed to these individuals, every step of the process needs to have a check to ensure that it's working the way that it was intended to work. So basically, you're doing it would be an ongoing audit of a real-time audit of the entire process. As one thing happens, that step has to be reviewed. When the next step happens and is completed, that step has to be reviewed to ensure that it's working the way that it's supposed to work and that it mitigates the possibility of any type of fraud. I'm sorry? Well, one of the things that we would like to do is we would like to have a public-private partnership with accounting firms throughout the Commonwealth who have done this type of work, and we would like to work with them to have them do the work, and ultimately my office would be the ones that would be provided the information from them once it's been completed. This would be something aside from that. So this wouldn't be part of my initial budget request.
A year ago, when the first stimulus that the federal government sent out, I asked Pat Toomey, who had an oversight role in that. I said, how do you protect against waste, fraud, and abuse? And his answer was simply, you can't. It's going out so fast to help people. It's important. There's going to be waste, fraud, and abuse. Right. To what degree can the state have oversight of what the feds are sending?
Well, as far as once the federal government, if the funds go directly from the federal government to these entities, then that's going to be the federal government's responsibility. And that's one of the reasons why the federal government has given somewhere in the neighborhood of $150 million to its Inspector General's office to do just that. So and we need to follow that same type of process here in Pennsylvania. Now, unfortunately, you are never going to stop fraud, and that's just a reality. However, by having the proper processes in place, you can definitely mitigate it, and that's what we're looking to do as well.
And Senator, if you could address, too, because the legislature's in charge of spending money, right? This is the federal money coming in. Talk about the relationship between Fed money and what you guys can do to make sure it's going where it's supposed to go.
So we have been having conversations with the Auditor General, members on both sides of the aisle. The state government has been responsible for distributing a lot of that money out amongst all types of entities, nonprofits, businesses, individuals, other governmental entities, and that's really where our oversight function comes in, and that's why we believe it's important. You know, the Auditor General continues to say that for every dollar that is lost to waste, fraud, and abuse, even if we can claw it back. We can get those dollars back. We're only going to get pennies on that dollar lost. That's taxpayer money. And what happens when we do that? We dishonor the people who pay our bills, but we also do a disservice to the people who really need that assistance. It means less money for the people who really need it.
General, you mentioned that public-private partnership. Do you have an idea about how much that may cost to get that off the ground, and what kind of time frame you're looking at?
As far as the dollar amount, we figured it out. It would be like 1/10 of 1% of the amount that the state is getting, and that would come to maybe about $10-12 million statewide for this. And we think that that's a pretty decent investment, and we don't look at it as funds are being spent. We look at it as an investment to deter fraud, waste, and abuse. So.
You and I have talked about the fact that your budget is the same as it was in 1993. You're down 140 people from that time frame. How important is funding, getting that funding back, or at least some funding to try and get, because this is a lot of work.
Right. Well, it's definitely important, and as far as the budget, we hope that it'll get restored. I've had numerous conversations, and so far things are going well. But as far as with this particular issue, this is a side issue, aside from my budget. So this deals just directly with the ARPA funds.
Any other questions? Thank you, General.
So then you're saying this $10 to $12 million is now the federal funds that
That would be correct. Yes. And that's in line with what the feds are doing, what the Inspector General's office are doing for the feds.
you've already identified the funds that
No, not yet. But that's something that it's not going to be a problem. I mean, we've worked with these types of firms in the past, so it shouldn't be a problem identifying those firms.
Do you envision that what you do will kind of mirror the Inspector General, obviously on a smaller scale, as far as some of the practices that they've put in place to try and stop the fraud from happening?
Some of them, with the Inspector General's office, some of their functions are, of course, a little different from what I do in the Auditor General's office. They're law enforcement on the federal level. The Inspector General's law enforcement. We're not. The Inspector General's office on the federal level has subpoena powers. We don't. So, but we're hoping to get that if this happens to be approved.
Thank you, General.
Thank you, everybody.